going to change my MO at the end of this thing.
Well, I'm going to make one Logan's run to California because I hate the cold. But let me ask you this, Admiral. Last week we talked about SecDef and Michelle Flournoy and all that. First of all, do you have any reaction to Tony Blinken and Janet Yellen and Ron Klain and a group of mainstream left, I call them center-left people who are populating out the Biden administration?
Yeah, I'd call them in this space the international relations, security, cyber. I think it's a centrist group. Point one, they're very experienced. Everybody who is coming in was a deputy and is now stepping up to cabinet level. I think experience matters, so that's good. Number two, maybe most importantly, Hugh, it's a very collegial group. They've worked together. I know them all from my days as Supreme Allied Commander. I watched them kind of run that interagency process together. They get along. It's no drama team. In a basketball world, they're more interested in assists than who's the leading scorer on the team. That's a good thing. And then thirdly, I think they have roughly the right instincts about the international scene, which is to say they'll try and build coalitions. They'll work with our allies. They'll work with, when appropriate, with international organizations. So I think overall, it's a solid, capable team.
Now, when I look at the sub-cabinet level, we still have to see Attorney General, and that matters a lot to me. I'm hoping it's Chris Coons or Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. But when we look at state and defense, we go down to the levels that I pay a lot of attention to, like I do at Justice, to the Assistant Attorney Generals. I really don't know much about the rest of the government. I do, but I don't care. I care about justice and state. And I'm thinking about the service secretaries. And, we had a lot of trouble with the service secretaries under President Trump. And I'm wondering, Army, Air Force, Navy, Space Force, what kind of service secretaries, what qualities do you look for, Admiral?
Number one, I look for someone who has experience with that branch of the service. I think it really matters at the service secretary level. So whether that was many years ago when an individual was in the space side of the Air Force, but at least touched it, or was in the Navy, or was in the Army or the Marine Corps. I think that really matters in those jobs. Number two, you're hoping for somebody who has a business experience, who has the acumen to understand the acquisition side. Really, those jobs are all about train, equip, and organize. They're not ordering carrier battle groups here, there, and everywhere. As you well know, they're about funding, training, equipping, and organizing. And thirdly, you kind of hope they have some experience working with the Hill, working with the Congress. Those are three really important aspects. And, I spent 2 years as effectively the chief of staff to the Secretary of the Navy, Richard Danzig. So I know these jobs very well. It's an important job to continue the culture and the ethos of the service, but even more importantly, to run the business of the service. So there's three qualities I think are important.
Let me follow up on that, because I think you also did a similar job for Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, did you not?
I did.
So how does the Navy, or how does the Pentagon, how does the Uniformed Services staff up a new administration of politicos? There's got to be someone at the chairman of the Joint Chiefs level saying, "Oh, so it's going to be X. That means we're going to go get Y." They match Stavridis with Rummy. Why? Who does that, and what do they look for?
Yeah, I think that they look for building experience, as we say, and I'm not talking about building something. I'm talking about the building, as it's often referred to. They look for someone who's had 2 or 3 jobs in the Pentagon. In fact, one of the reasons I was pulled in to work for Secretary Rumsfeld was he had grabbed somebody that he knew, a fine person, good officer, but zero Pentagon experience. That officer really floundered in that role as senior military assistant. I had had 3 previous tours in the building in the Pentagon, so building experience, very important. Number 2, as I mentioned a moment ago, you look for an officer who has spent a little bit of time at least up on the Hill and understands the Congress, because that's a big part of your clientele, both at SecDef and at the service secretary level. And then number 3, kind of the opposite of those things, they look for someone who's a terrific operator. And I don't say that to be self-aggrandizing, but they look for someone who has commanded a ship, has flown a jet, has driven a submarine to the depths of the ocean, because they want that civilian to be able to turn to that senior military person and say, hey, what's it like on a destroyer steaming through the South China Sea right now? They need that perspective. So you got to have the operational chops, but you need those other things I mentioned as well.
I'm really curious, Admiral. I generally don't have any idea about this. Do they keep a list of people who are actually qualified? They can't take 4 stars and 3 stars and 2 stars and put them into the jobs. They have to put captains and colonels into those jobs, maybe a 1 star. Do they keep a list and then move that list around depending upon the personality of the incoming service secretary, SecDef, undersecretary?
Each of the services has a section in its overall personnel world, its HR world, but they have a very small section. Typically, it's called flag matters, because these are flag and general officers, because they get to break a flag with a star or 2 on it. They are also looking at the senior colonels, as you just mentioned. And yes, there is a tracking process, and it's not simply to be the executive assistant or the senior military assistant. It's also who should be our defense attaché in Beijing, who speaks Chinese and has had a tour, who would be really good to run the Joint Strike Fighter program, who is the top person we can find who would be someone who could go to the Second Fleet because they have Atlantic experience. So yes, there is a cadre, a kind of a very rough list. In our detailers, as we call them in the Navy, the human resource professionals. The Marines call them monitors, by the way. Your detailer hopefully has you on his or her list and is looking to move you along. I'll close with a piece of advice my father, a retired Marine colonel, gave me once when I was a young officer. He said, Jim, just remember that your detailer is just as interested in your career development as you are in his. And that's a humorous way of saying, don't overestimate how personally involved your detail or your human resources professional is going to be. By and large, however, it's a good process that moves, I think, good people into these jobs who are prepared for them.
Now, there's a story in Politico today, which I find kind of amusing. It's about my friend Robert O'Brien, who's the National Security Advisor. They went around, they try and find people to say he's running for president. He's not. But he is, I talked to him about the NSC, and they've downsized it to about 100 people, back to where it was about the Clinton era. He's got Pentagon detailees there. I am curious, how many people do you think Jake Sullivan ought to have from the Pentagon on that staff? How much military ought to be mixed in with the civilian side at the White House?
Yeah, I think I lean more toward the model that National Security Advisor O'Brien has put in place, make it a lean organization. I do like having military detailees, as the expression goes there, for the same reason that I mentioned earlier. It's powerful and useful for civilians to be able to turn to an experienced operational warfighter who's right there with them and ask them, what's that going to be like if we move those B-1 bombers to Diego Garcia? What does that mean? There's real power in that. So I would say you need some number, but I wouldn't look for more than a handful. And I suspect, knowing Jake Sullivan, who I have a lot of regard for, as I do for Mr. O'Brien, Advisor O'Brien, I think the key to that job is that you want someone, like on a basketball team, who wants to make everyone else look good around them. Someone who is more interested in getting assists than being the leading scorer. And if you have that kind of person as the national security advisor, you're going to have a well-run interagency process. That's the type of person you need. Few military can help with that. Few foreign service officers, few intel officers, maybe some folks from Department of Homeland Security, some outside lawyers, some political. You need it all. And I think you can do that in a way that builds a good team, somewhere between 100 and 200 people.
Last question has nothing to do with anything we talked about. I think you're close to Georgia, where you live. Are you in a Georgia media market? Are you swamped with ads for these Georgia runoffs?
Yes and yes. I feel like I'm personally getting to know all 4 of the senatorial candidates upon whom I will not opine. But yes, North Florida is right here.
That is just, it must be never ending. I think every minute of commercial time has been bought on my 13 affiliates in Georgia because it's just an avalanche. It must drive you crazy. Are they switching them up at least? Are there new ones every day?
Yes, it is. It's a very sophisticated campaign on both sides, and why is that, Hugh? Because it's a wash in money, and
Yeah.
you can look at the pros and the cons of all of that. But yeah, here in North Florida, it's pretty active. You sometimes feel like you're in my case a Georgia boy. I'm not, but
You're not.
uh, I
Well,
yeah. I'll
Admiral,
close
thank
by
you.
saying I have a daughter in Atlanta who works for Google and a son there who's a doctor. And they pick up the phone and it's Ralph Warnock on the phone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that crazy. Or Senator Perdue calling.
They've
It's
never had this much money spent in one state in this little amount of time. I pity your children, but I'm glad that they're fine. Admiral James Stavridis, happy Thanksgiving to you, Admiral. Have a great, blessed Thanksgiving.
same to you, my friend. And let's give thanks for this nation. Thank you.
Agree. Stavridis J, if you want to follow him. Stavridis J. I always Jerry Hendricks.